Well, thank you very much for staying with us on the AM show. Quite a lot to discuss this morning, and we're digging into the bit about Parliament and its relations with other arms of government, the executive and the judiciary, but in particular respect to some of the matters that have come up in recent times. Funding, one of them, the budget statement that is being discussed on the floor of Parliament. Now, joining us for the discussion, Richard Echampong, he's Member of Parliament for Bia East. He's also a member of the Finance Committee. He joins us. Then there's John Kuma, Member of Parliament for Ejiso, as well as, well, the man who maybe will be the intermediary, juggling matters on Parliament, and an analyst, Dr. Rashid Draman, Executive Director, African Center for Parliamentary Affairs. Gentlemen, a very good morning to you.
Okay. Good morning.
Great. So I would kindly ask that you unmute so we can hear from all of you. Let's try that one more time. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hello. Good morning.
Right. So now that we have everybody on board, let me just welcome as well Honorable Echampong, who actually joins us in the studio. You also happen to be a member of the Finance Committee. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Great. All right, so we dig into the matters, and we're going to start from the end of basically the processes that have been followed so far. The budget statement has been read, and I'll start with you, Honourable. The budget statement has been read per the Constitution, per the standing orders of Parliament. Following the reading of the budget, there are certain processes to be followed by both the minority and majority sides to come to some sort of agreement on what ought to be carried forward in terms of the economic or fiscal year. Just walk us briefly through what this process is, what we should expect to see in the coming days and maybe week.
Thank you very much, my brother, and a very good morning to your cherished viewers. It's been a while coming to the show.
I'm glad you're back.
That's correct. Normally when budget comes around, then we try to also show face and then discuss the contents of the budget because of the committee that we serve. As you rightly pointed out, Article 179 gives the authority to the president to cause any other minister to present to Parliament the estimates, the expenditure of the year. But election year, we don't present budget by the end of November. So we do what we call vote on an account. So we do appropriation for 3 months for the executive, and it will expire by the end of March 31st. That's why we delay in presenting this budget. So the Article 70 now will mandate the president to nominate any other person, but normally it's the finance minister who does that on behalf of the president. But we passed the Public Financial Management Act, so Section 23(1) will say the minister will present to Parliament the estimate of the year. But in that law, minister is defined as the minister responsible for finance. But now that we don't have minister of finance, so if you look at this year's budget, they did not mention Section 23(1). Because if they do that, then it will be a contravention of the law.
And your side of Parliament, the minority raised this bit that in the past we've even had Haruna Idrisu and others have to play certain roles, but certain measures were put in place. That's when we had this caretaker minister.
But then we had not passed the PFMA.
Right.
It was passed in 2016. And then if you look at our standing orders, Order 140, 141, 142 is very clear on this matters. But we understand the situation we find ourselves. So we waive all those laws and order because we are masters of our own rules, because we needed the budget to be presented to the House. So Chairman Sabonso did what is needful, and then he presented the budget. And after that, Friday, Saturday, up to Monday, there was a post-budget workshop for all members of Parliament. So experts were invited to take us through the rudiment of the budget, how to critique the budget, and all that. Some of us, this is my third term in the House, but I have new members. It doesn't matter your profession. Parliament is a very unique institution by itself. So members should be taken through the processes and all that. So we came back on Monday evening. Some came back yesterday. And then we started the debates on yesterday. So we started on the economic front. Yesterday, 7 members from each side debated the budget. Now we are looking at the principle underpinning all those assumptions put forward by the executive. So this is where we are now. But a lot of talk is in town in respect of taxes, the newly introduced taxes that the government want to put in place to recover the financial sector cleanup, the freebies they gave to Ghanaian people, especially the lockdown areas and all that. So people are expressing their own feelings, but those in government are trying to push for it. But we are speaking for the ordinary man on the streets. But yesterday, something unique also came up.
Right.
With the presentation of Mr. Speaker. The executive is trying to use...
You mean with regard to the budget?
The budget.
Okay. So we shall get into some of those matters. I don't want us to put the cart before the horse. Okay. But these matters of the funding of the 3 arms of government what should really pertain, yes, we'll get into. But before I move on to Honorable Kumar to find out what his thoughts are so far with regard to the process, I'd like to find out from you, how much of a concern is it for your end in Parliament, the minority caucus, when it comes to the absence of the finance minister designate? Because you have raised certain concerns with that. Now the budget has been put forward, and he is the person clothed with the power to actually respond to some of these issues that may come up. Today we've heard him saying, we must gear up to support government in terms of COVID-19 on the back of it and all of that. What is the urgency? What is the feeling on the minority side when it comes to that issue?
The absence of the finance minister has created some kind of vacuum, because we all know that the budget was not prepared by Osechi Mensah-Bonsu. He just came and read the budget to all of us. There are certain issues that we want to raise, especially when it comes to the estimate. People must account to their stewardship. But the minister himself, who has been recycled, is not in place. So even if you put certain questions before the Osechi Mensah-Bonsu, he can defer those questions. That let's wait until a substantive minister is appointed.
Is that going to affect the budget debate?
It is.
It's going to affect the budget debate.
It is. Like we say, we approved 10 billion from Bank of Ghana to finance the budget. They ended up spending 22 billion Ghana cedis. What accounted for all these things? Where is the minister to explain all these things to us? You projected that your revenue will be 55 billion and your expenditure will be 97 billion. But we ended up spending 100 billion Ghana cedis. What are the rationale behind all these things? What accounted for it? Osechi Mensah-Bonsu cannot be in the better position to explain this. He has to go back, consult somebody, get some information. And dissemination of information comes with distortions and all that. And you can't even hold him responsible for what has happened, because just a caretaker minister. So that's our difficulty now. So we are praying that the finance minister, because we are told he's in good health, he will return home, get vetted. If he goes through the process, then we can hold him responsible for many of his decisions as to why we ended up with this deficit number 11% and all that. You can't hold any other person responsible. And the president himself will not come to the floor to answer these questions. Even if you want to file a question in respect of these numbers,
it must go through the finance minister.
You can't hold the governor before the plenary. He has no mandate. The finance minister will act on his behalf. Where is the finance minister to do this? And in the absence of the finance minister, you can't appoint a deputy finance minister. But the constitution says the substantive minister must be consulted before a deputy minister is appointed. Okay.
Honorable Kumar, I'll come to you shortly, but just again, coming back to you very briefly. So are you willing to put in place certain mechanisms to ensure that, are you willing to fast track, for example, the vetting process when it comes to the minister designate for finance, to ensure that some of these questions can be answered? Because the process has started already in terms of analyzing the budget, debating its contents, and deciding what the way forward should be as a country. What is the positioning of the NDC on that? What concessions are you willing to make to ensure that the finance minister, as quickly as possible, can take office and respond to some of these?
The word should not be fast tracking, because either he will get approval or he will not get approval. It's not automatic that you are going to approve of him. So we are waiting for the man to appear before the committee. If he's rejected, another person is nominated, so that that person becomes the substantive minister, and he will be clothed with the power to answer these questions.
Okay. Well, Honorable Kumar, this is what I'm going to do. Dr. Rashid is on a bit of a time leash this morning, so I'll just have you come in, Honorable Kumar, when it comes to what you can reflect on so far in terms of the process of analyzing the budget in Parliament, and then I'll quickly move on to Dr. Rashid Draman. So, Honorable Kumar, let me give you that bite. So far, with regard to the debate on the floor of Parliament on the budget, what are your quick reactions? Honorable Kumar, can you hear me, sir? Okay. Unfortunately, technology playing some games with us. But let me quickly move on to Dr. Rashid Draman and pose the same question to you. We have our budget statement that has been presented for the first time by a non-finance minister, substantive one. Your reflections so far on the process, the budget statement, its contents, and now that we're starting the debate. So let's start with that. Dr. Draman.
Yeah, good morning to the viewers. Just to add that I'm a member of the Parliamentary Appointment Committee. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It appears, Honorable Kumar. So, Honorable Kumar, let Dr. Draman quickly react, and I'll come to you, sir. So, Dr. Draman, please go ahead.
Yes, so thank you very much. I think what we have seen this year has not been different from what we witnessed over the many years past, except, of course, as you indicated, for the fact that we don't have the substantive minister showing up, and I believe this is maybe one of the very few occasions where we've had such a situation. But we had in his replacement a very competent person in the person of the leader of the House, the Honorable Oseche Mensah-Bonsu. We've seen, following the presentation, of course, which I'm not an economist, but I leave that discussion about all the percentages and inflationary figures and deficits to the economists and to the members of Parliament to debate. We saw following the presentation, the post-budget workshop, which took place, leads to equip honorable members with the needed skills so that they can maybe properly scrutinize the budget and ask the right questions. By the way, just for the information of your viewers, this post-budget workshop is something that we instituted working with Parliament going back to about 20 years ago. And we are very pleased to at least know that now it's become part of Parliament's calendar, if you like. At least in the past, as soon as the budget is presented, the following day or week, they start the debate. And at that point, we thought that it was important, particularly given the composition of Parliament and given where members come from. Even if you are an expert in finance, sometimes you need to be guided when it comes to the budget. So I think overall the process has gone as has been the case over the last many years. Except, of course, this time around, we are hearing all the issues that are coming out of Parliament, particularly, the desire by the minority to have the minister who was given the resources to come before the House and answer the questions. I think that this is going to be one of the difficulties.
Do you feel that is a fair standpoint by the minority, requesting that the minister designate himself be in position to, answer some of these questions because he can? On the other hand, we know that he's been ill for a while. What do you make of that, suggestion that has been put forward?
To be very honest, as the honorable member in the studio has indicated, they cannot be asking Honorable Chairman Mensah-Bonsu to answer these questions because he would easily say, I didn't execute the budget. The person who executed the budget is the one who is better positioned to answer the questions. And it could be that, yes, there is a deficit, or he has gone beyond, what was requested, and so on. But there are probably very, plausible explanations to that would be accepted by the House. At the end of the day, it's about sharing information. It's about being transparent in terms of how our resources have been used. And I think that is a fair question to ask. And it's going to be a question that perhaps only the minister himself can answer. Unfortunately, because we don't have, he hasn't been vetted yet and appointed, and there's no substantive deputy minister. But I think maybe in the worst case scenario, those who executed the budget with him are still there. We have the previous deputy ministers. I believe some of them are in parliament. They might be in a better position to answer the questions than perhaps putting Honorable Chairman in that uncomfortable situation.
Does the law, do the standing orders of Parliament, allow for that in this peculiar situation we find ourselves, for the deputies to actually step in, as they have been a part of this process, to answer those critical questions?
No, I think like the honorable member in the studio has said, they are the masters of their own rules. Already I think a lot of the rules have been sidestepped in order to get this process going, and in order not to have our country in a situation of where the executive doesn't have resources to run the affairs of the country. So I think whatever the rules are, I believe if they are all minded and the two sides agree, they can always find solutions that are workable. At the end of the day, the standing orders are perhaps orders that have been designed by Parliament itself, and they can always I think I can't remember the exact numbers in the book, but I think there are instances where the standing orders can be suspended to allow for certain processes to go on. If you allow me, I don't know how much, because I don't have very much time. I was hoping that maybe the main issue has to do with the tussle now between the executive and the legislature, as well as the judiciary being dragged in terms of resources, and
that is something, Dr. Draman, that we're going to address shortly. I'll just give the opportunity to Honorable Kumar to also deliver his initial reactions to the process so far, and then I shall come to you. But on the back of what you said, I guess a bit of biblical analogy there, the Sabbath being made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So you could say in Parliament as well, the standing orders were made for Parliament, not Parliament for the standing orders. And they could decide what the way could be in this peculiar circumstance. But let me come to Honorable Kumar, Member of Parliament for Ejisu and member of the Appointments Committee as well. Thank you so much for staying with us. What would be your initial reaction so far? Budget statement presented by Oseiche Mensah Bonsu, the majority leader, and now with the process initiated in terms of analyzing the details. What is your reflection on day one so far, Honorable Kumar?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share my views on this matter. I think that it's been a process well managed so far. We must always remember that the budget is the budget of His Excellency the President, and the minister presents it for and on behalf of His Excellency the President. So to deliver their
It's unfortunate. It appears the connection of the Honourable Member of Parliament for Ejisu has not been very good this morning. Honourable Kumar, can you hear me? Okay, so we might have to move on and come back to him. We might have to move on and come back to Honourable Kumar on that beat. But this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to come back to you, Dr.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Honorable Kumar, so you can go on with your submission if the connection is better now. Yes.
I'm saying that the fact that Honorable Chairman presented it didn't really take anything as far as the law is concerned, because whichever minister did the presentation will do so for and on behalf of His Excellency the President. And the question of certain key questions not being able to be answered. We already have two of his able special advisors. I mean, two former deputy ministers of finance who are also members of parliament. We have Honorable Abner from Super East and Honorable Kwekukwa.
Okay, so Honorable Kumar, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try to remedy the connection, work on it a bit. Our technical team is working on that so that we can hear you better, because the points you're making are important. We want to get them. But let me come to Dr. Draman and Honorable Echampon. I'll crave your indulgence on this because Dr. Draman has to take leave of us at some point. You had wanted to dig into the matter of the budget for the three arms of government, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And we know the Honorable Speaker of Parliament has actually rejected any cuts to the budgets of, the legislative body, Parliament, and the judiciary. Puts both of them together about 119 million for Parliament, that less what they are going to get, and then the judiciary by about 77 million. You're looking at close to 200 million being shaved off. Mr. President says it's on the back of COVID-19. We need to tighten our belts as a country. But as far as we know, this is supposed to be a counterbalancing system, and Parliament is rejecting it. What's your take?
Well, I think my take on this is that yes, we might have to be mindful of the impact of COVID-19 on the economy of our nation, as well as perhaps the global economy. But over the years, I mean, I've been watching our Parliament very closely since the second Parliament. So I mean, that's about more than 20 years now. Over the years, I mean, I don't know, perhaps somebody might have to tell me, across all the different governments that we've had, I haven't seen a situation where Parliament got exactly what it wanted in terms of budgetary allocation. And what this has done is that it has just reinforced the skewed relationship between the executive and the legislature, to the extent that the legislature over the years, and I'm not talking about this eighth Parliament, over the years has been in a situation where usually, I mean, committees go cup in hand to the various government departments that they are supposed to oversee. Mm-hmm. And these departments are the ones that usually fund them, except maybe when in instances when perhaps groups like us and other, I mean, partners of Parliament have some projects that support Parliament, then they are taken out and supported to do their oversight work. Honorable Babin, the Right Honorable Speaker, has been part of this, and I think that he's been waiting for an opportunity to correct this challenge. Mm. And I think, I mean, my take on this is that I hope, the two sides in Parliament will see this not an issue of NDC, MPP, but an issue of the legislature versus the executive. Mm. Because already we have a very serious information asymmetry that exists between the executive and the legislature. You see the minister, as he rightly, Honorable Kumar, hinted, with a coterie of assistants, technical people, and so on. Then you go to Parliament, committees sometimes have very serious challenges of, attracting qualified technical people who can help them, match the executive in terms of the analysis that is needed, the scrutiny that is needed to do their work. And this takes resources. Mm. And a Parliament that cannot determine its own budget, a Parliament that cannot have the resources that it needs for it to function both administratively and then also execute the constitutionally mandated functions of oversight, lawmaking, and representation. I think it's a Parliament that certainly will be found wanting when an assessment is done in terms of how it executes its mandate.
Are you suggesting, Dr. Draman, that if these cuts are to move on, if they are applied to Parliament, Parliament is going to be less effective, less efficient on account of that? That Parliament is going to suffer because of these cuts?
Oh, it goes without saying. I think that is very, very clear, because at the end of the day, I mean, they have statutory obligations. I mean, first, so some of the resources will go into that. And then beyond that, you know, once all that is done, the key engine of Parliament, which is, I mean, the committee I mean, the various committees that are supposed to do the oversight work, usually do not have all the resources that they need, you know, and this is where, you know, the emphasis has to be. So, I mean, if we have these huge cuts, I understand there is COVID, yes, but at the end of the day, we also need a body that can give us an assurance as a nation, some kind of insurance policy that those who are given the resources to execute and to discharge, you know, the plans of the executive, the plans, I mean, in the manifesto of the government and so on. I mean, those people can be held to account and held to, I mean, be held to account in a very efficient manner. And this will require resources. I mean, why? I mean, as the Right Honorable Speaker said, it is not for the executive to say this is what we are going to give Parliament, and then the executive would determine its own budget. I think, I mean, we need to have a very serious conversation as a country. I mean, over the years, a lot of wrongs have been done to the extent that, you know, it has made our Parliament not quite efficient when it comes particularly to issues of oversight. I mean, some years ago, we did a study and we looked at our Parliament and other parliaments across the continent. You know, the Kenyans, the Ugandans did quite well because they have laws that safeguard Parliament, particularly when it comes to these issues of financial independence. I mean, we don't have that. We don't have a budget law. I mean, we don't have a parliamentary budget office yet, and so on. And all these take resources. And I think, I hope our leaders in Parliament will be minded about this and think more about the legislature as an institution rather than maybe a battle between NDC and MPP.
Okay.
And so on.
Let's talk about constitutional requirements, why we may not have specific laws when it comes to budgeting critically, as you put it. At least the Speaker of Parliament has brought to the fore some matters, and I'm just going to raise them so you find out whether the executive is overstepping its bounds or maybe even impinging on the law. And this is what the Speaker of Parliament, to quote him, has said. What the Constitution has done is for the executive to make recommendations and to negotiate during the deliberations of the budget before the House. I note, however, that in the budget statement and the expenditure estimates laid on Friday, March 12, 2021, the recommendation of the President were laid instead of the original estimates that were submitted by Parliament and the judiciary. It is not for the executive to impose ceilings on the judiciary or Parliament, and we have to ensure the proper things must be done. So, constitutionally, per the requirements we have, is the executive at this point in time doing anything that is over and above what it ought to be doing?
I mean, I think I'll leave that to the constitutional lawyers to provide this answer. I think I can just give a simple, layman, somebody watching Parliament's answer. And that I think, if I look at it on the face of it, I think the executive must have to come back again and maybe try and do something different. I mean, I know, as I said right from the beginning, there is COVID. I mean, COVID has impacted on our economy just like the economies of other nations. Okay. At the end of the day, Parliament might not get all that it is asking for. But I think there has to be some kind of negotiation. Maybe Parliament might have to soften its stance a little bit and come to the middle, but the executive would also have to make sure that at least if Parliament doesn't get a full cap, at least some kind of negotiation should produce some adequate resources that would not leave Parliament in a situation where it just sits down and cannot do anything when it comes to some of the important roles that it has to play. I mean, that's. I think that this is not too much to ask for, and we want to get to a point where our parliament is not just simply a budget approving parliament and simply just takes whatever comes before it and says yes, this is approved. No, I think we have to get to a point where, just like what we see in many countries. Some negotiations, if you don't give us this, as an institution, I think we are not going to approve this budget, because sometimes, for some of us, people ask us a question: if Parliament doesn't have the resources, is it not the same body that approves the budget? Then you are stuck. You are stuck. You don't have an answer. Over the years, I know the position of Honorable Chairman Sabosu. I know the position of the minority leader. I know the position of the Right Honorable Speaker, because we've worked with them. They've been in a position in power over the years, and we've heard them lament about the challenges that Parliament faces as an institution. This is the time, I think, to reset the relationship, and I think everybody should support the Right Honorable Speaker. Not to wreck the nation's coffers,
right?
But to make sure that at least if we can't get the right thing done completely, at least some effort must begin, and the time is now.
Okay, right before you take leave of us, let me just also mention that we still have Honorable Echampon in the studio, Member of Parliament for Bia East, and he also is here with us. He's a member of the Finance Committee. We also have Honorable Kuma, Member of Parliament for Ejisu, and Vice Chairman, Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee of Parliament. Dr. Draman, in less than a minute, I just want you to address this because you have to go. I want you to address this question. Do you feel we are here where we find ourselves now because we have this peculiar setup where we have a minority member becoming the Speaker of Parliament, and so this is exposing some of the problems we have in the system? Do you feel it is because we have Alban Sumana Bagbin, Right Honorable, in that position as Speaker? That is why these things are coming up.
Yes, I think that might be one part of the explanation.
Okay.
Because you see, in the 6th Parliament, I remember very well, the Right Honorable Duajahu made a very clear statement in the House saying that, look, the practice where, government departments fund committees to go and do oversight must stop. And we have to have enough adequate resources. He was Speaker at the time, and his party was in power. That couldn't happen. I don't know what the explanation is. And perhaps if maybe the same situation had repeated itself, maybe we wouldn't be seeing this playing out the way it is playing out now. This is maybe what we need as a country. Okay. NDC, MPP in power. At the end of the day, I think it's about you and I. It's about our children. It's about the future of our country. And I think that is more important than any party politics. At this time in our history.
Dr. Draman, thank you very much for your time with us this morning. Executive Director, Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs. It's been insightful sharing your thoughts on the show. But as indicated, we also have joining us via phone Honorable Kuma. Honorable Kuma, thank you so much for your patience with us. Honorable.
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Great. Thank you for staying with us. So you were delivering your submission on the process so far. Maybe if you could quickly round up on that. I don't want to stymie that train of thought. So if you could wrap up on that so we move on to other matters.
Sure. That all that I was saying was that whoever does the presentation of the budget will do it for and on behalf of His Excellency the President. In fact, in other jurisdictions, the President himself comes to lay the budget statement before Parliament. It's not in all cases that the Minister of Finance has to do it. In the UK, sometimes the Prime Minister will do it, not even the Secretary for Exchequer or the Secretary of Finance. So sometimes even in Nigeria, you have instances where Buhari himself has laid his budget before the Nigeria Parliament. So some of these things sometimes happen, but of course, His Excellency the President can decide per our laws to nominate one of his cabinet ministers to do it on his behalf. So the difficulty where others think that some questions cannot be answered, especially in this particular instance. We have two special advisors of the Minister Designate for Finance, who were also former Deputy Ministers of Finance, Honorable Akina and Honorable Kweku Kwatin, who are both members of Parliament, and yesterday also joined the debate to answer to some of the questions that were by members of the other side. I think that obviously this is not the ideal situation we all wanted. We wanted to see a healthy finance minister doing his job. So I don't think we should overstate it. Whatever has happened as far as law is concerned is within the remit of the rules of Parliament and within the Constitution of our country.
Okay, so before we move on to talk real money matters and taxes and levies and what has been levied on what, NHIL, ESLA, fuel prices and all of that. Before we get into that, we've already started the discussion on capping, so to speak, what amounts Parliament gets, the judiciary gets. So let's continue the conversation from there. Now, two takeaways from what Dr. Draman said. He insists that he thinks one of the causes of where we are now, because it's not a novelty that Parliament puts forward a budget and does not get everything it has, asked for. One of the reasons is the fact that we have a Speaker of Parliament who is from the minority side. He has also suggested that we might, on the part of the executive, you might want to take a different approach to this situation of tightening the belts of the legislature and the executive. How do you react to Dr. Draman's comments?
Yes, I think it's a good point that Dr. Dramani made. It is important to recognize that the budgetary estimates that are submitted by the judiciary and the legislature are not supposed to be changed. I mean, if you look at the rules. But the same Parliament also enacted laws last year on the ability of the government to the Minister of Finance to cap and put a certain ceiling on all budgetary allocations, especially on statutory funds. So I think it brings to fore the need to talk, to negotiate on both sides, so that at the end of the day we can have a compromise situation where the exchequer is not overburdened, the finance minister's resources is not overburdened, whilst at the same time not crippling the ability of Parliament and the judiciary to also deliver on their mandate.
If the route of negotiation is what you should have taken from the start, why this seeming imposition, which has got the Speaker reacting in this forceful manner?
Yes, this budget is the procedure of the budget presentation, because the Speaker will not even know how their submitted estimates to be treated until the budget is read. I'm sure that's the reason why it's already in the public domain and how things are being discussed. But in the end, I believe that it will be resolved. There's a procedure where some of these things can be discussed and resolved. And I think as it's been raised in Parliament, the executive will be notified of it and the necessary steps will be taken.
On the angle of whether some of these things are surfacing because we have a speaker from the other side, so to speak, what do you think?
Obviously, before, if you have the speaker coming from the same government, sometimes they tend to appreciate the difficulty of the executive in most cases, so will not press more than would have been the case. In this instance, you have the speaker who is not coming from the same party of the government. So you should expect that certain negotiation demands will be more firm and stern than if it was coming from the same party with the government, because it is obvious that both sides have problems. The legislature will need and the judiciary would need these funds to be able to execute or carry out their programs effectively. But at the same time, government is also hard pressed for resources. We know the levels of debt, we know the commitments of government from interest payments and several other demands. They need to construct infrastructure and a whole lot of demands on government. So some of these interplay of important demands on government will force the government to sometimes ask for certain leverage, but that will not be, easily accepted under this kind of situation. So I believe with further discussions, we'll be able to resolve so that we can come to a middle point to get to a situation where we are able to provide enough resources to the judiciary, the legislature, and at the same time, we make it possible for government to also meet other obligations.
Okay, let me come into the studio now, and we have Honorable Champon still here with us. You've been very patient. Thank you very much for your time. But this is your bite. You get also to dig into all of these matters that we've been discussing. But key takeaways so far. Dr. Draman says, yes, it's because we have a Speaker of Parliament from the other side. That is why we are facing some of these. That was just corroborated by Honorable Kuma as well, who thinks it is that. In fact, he adds that maybe the Speaker might not appreciate where government is. And for that reason, we are where we are. Are we merely playing politics with this?
I don't see it to be in that light that we are playing politics with it. But like Dr. Damani said, this is the right time for Parliament to also exert its authority. Because we've been preaching this over and over, that there should be a decoupling of the legislature from the executive. But who will take the bull by the horn? You have a member of Parliament who is a cabinet minister. He goes to cabinet to take a decision. That same person comes to Parliament to debate the same policy. So in this case, he will speak for the executive.
So there's a conflict in there.
Serious conflict. And every member of the ruling government wants to be appointed by the executive. So they are doing the bidding of the executive. So you don't see clearly the function of the legislature. We are in charge of the approval of the budget. But whatever is submitted by Parliament, somebody sits somewhere and take a decision as to how to be allocated to the executive.
And that somebody sitting somewhere is the executive.
The executive. And in terms of the judiciary, the law is very clear. Article 1793 says whatever estimate presented by the Chief Justice in consultation with the Judicial Council is not subject to revision. The law is very clear. And they cannot also put up unnecessary numbers that because the law gives us this room to operate, we are going to overburden the budget. No. They put up an estimate, and you know that they have other commitments, so that let's give them this money so that they can also exert their independence as judiciary or as legislature. But you bring your budget to me, and a government machinery, you have your own ceiling, you give your own allocation. That one, you expect me to give you 100% approval. But what I submitted to you, you give me a cut, saying because of COVID, because what is coming to the kitty cannot take care of all your expectations. Why are you spending so much by denying other arm of government what is due that other government institution? We have oversight responsibility over the executive. How can we perform our function? Sometimes NGOs come to support Parliament to do all this work, and it doesn't sit well with Parliament. So the point is, by the end of the day, if this NGO has no resources to support Parliament to do the oversight work, how can Parliament even check what the executive is doing? So,
per what Dr. Draman said, you also wholly agree that it will get Parliament wobbling, maybe on one leg. It will hamper the activities of Parliament if these cuts are brought to bear. So, like my colleague John Kuma said, there should be a middle ground. That at least it should be a win-win situation. Because in budget cycle, it's two things. Appropriation different from leases. You can be given 1 billion Ghana as an allocation. By the end of the day, the leases may be, let's say, 40 or 50%. So if you present, let's say, 200 million Ghana cedis,
and it's cut to, let's say, 100 Ghana cedis, we are not going to get the entire 100 million Ghana cedis by the end of the year, because we have 9 months to go. So if you reduce it, we are going to, in terms of leases, I'm not going to get 100%. So just peg it at the 200 million that I requested. So even if you lease 150 million, at least I can also get some resources to run the institution of parliament. Because we have right now we set up a lot of institutions within parliament, which we need to employ professionals to come and man those institutions in parliament for the good of all of us. We need to strengthen the legislature so that we can also perform our oversight responsibilities. Okay. This has nothing to do with compensation. It has nothing to do with benefit to members of parliament. This is an institution of parliament. So people should not take it that members are demanding so much. No, this has nothing to do with members of parliament. They are requesting these resources to run parliament as an institution.
Right.
Look at, because of COVID, sometimes during a state function, we don't sit in the chamber. We move to the tent. State of Nation address, budget presentation, and all that. You know, we pay for it. It's private developer who put up the tent.
So you're making reference to what we saw this year, for example?
Yes.
We had to.
Anytime we move to the tent, we pay for it. So all this has become an additional cost to Parliament.
But is Parliament not being too plaintive? We have the judiciary, the judicial service. They've also got a slash. They are not complaining.
They don't have...
You seem to be complaining on their behalf. They are not complaining.
Because they don't have the platform. We have the platform. Because they don't give approval to the budget. We do. So they presented the budget to us. We are going to approve that of the executive. So if you don't give what is due mean, it becomes difficult for Parliament to also take a decision on yours. Do you understand?
Is that going to be tit for tat? Is it to say that if the executive sticks to what it's proposing, you are also going to cut down on allocations for the executive?
We cannot increase the ceiling, but we can, sometimes at the committee level, we reduce certain numbers.
Is that going to happen? Is that going to be considered?
We will look at the total envelope. We look at the total project. Sometimes we can tell that these projections are so ambitious, you can't achieve them. Like in this budget, they are proposing to raise 72 billion revenue. That's against 113 billion expenditure. The gap is 41 billion. So you ask yourself, what was the performance for 2020 in terms of revenue generation? About 55 billion. So the question is, in the midst of COVID, many institutions, many organizations cannot even make break even. Are you sure you can rake in this 72 billion? If the answer is no, then the expenditure of 113 billion is very serious.
Right.
Do you understand it?
Right.
And even the deficit numbers, can't you reduce it from 11% to, let's say, 10%? So if you want to reduce it, you have to cut costs. So you look at the areas, like in this budget, they are allocating 200 million Ghana cedis to NIA. Already we've spent close to about 1.1 billion.
Of course, the Ghana card registration and all of that factoring in there.
So you ask yourself, okay, what are you going to use the 200 million for? Can we reduce it to 100 million? Free SHS, 1.975 billion allocation. Because of its education, let's maintain that one. Look at other sector, Maslok, 48 million. The point is, have you been able to recover the loan that you gave the previous years? If no, strengthen your recovery process, recover many of the facilities. Let's take the 48 million and use it for other purposes. Because giving loans, go and recover the loans so that we can get the money and we reimburse the state, or you give back the loan to other institutions.
So these are mechanisms the executive can use rather than maybe burden your guest house.
When they bring the estimate, we discuss all these things with them, and sometimes they take those advices, but it doesn't come to the public domain for people to see what happened. What people get to hear of it is what we discuss at the plenary. But committee issues, many of them, you don't get to see those things.
But just to clarify, Parliament is open to negotiating on these matters.
Oh yes, okay. Oh yes.
Let me go over the phone lines now and interact further with Honorable Kuma, who actually is Vice Chairman, Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee. Now, I would like to start the conversation in terms of, move it forward a bit in terms of the impositions of taxes and levies from your end. NHIL affected 5% before profit on the banks. There are so many that you've introduced. Even the fuel prices are going to be affected. That is going to affect fares as well. It appears to hit every Ghanaian from all angles. Now, some economists had said that we didn't need new taxes. How did we find ourselves here? How relevant, for example, is a sanitation and pollution tax when we all know that in the system we have very little to show in that in that end of things? Honorable Kumar.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll come to the taxes, but just to make a point briefly about the argument on decoupling the executive from the legislature and ensuring strict compliance to separation of powers. I think we have made this argument over the years since our independence time till now. And I think we should be very careful how we kind of always create an impression that it is not good to have ministers MPs becoming members of the executive.
Don't you see that conflict in there?
Well, we have been there before. If you look at the First Republic and the Second Republic, we were having strict members of parliament becoming the executive. I mean, if you were not an MP, you could not be appointed as ministers. The First and the Second Republic. Then in the Third Republic, we said, let's go strictly separation of powers under Liman. And you remember what happened? Yeah. The budget was even thrown away. There was no coordination between the executive and the legislature, and the government almost came crashing down. This is what informed the Fourth Republic in 1992, that in the Constitution, we said that we must have a blend of the executive and the legislature working together, because when we say separation of powers, it's like a car. You need both the tires, the engines, the seat, the steering wheel, all must work together at the same time for the car to run properly. So if you keep pushing arguments that decouple, it has its own difficulty and consequences on the country, and we should be careful how we do that. I think that we can resolve these matters when we talk and explain the situation and circumstances. Like the Honorable Richard rightly stated, there are new parliamentary programs and projects that require extra attention from the government in terms of funding. So if we can make this clear to the executive and show them why they must increase the funding and not put any seal on it, the executive is reasonable. We have the same people. I think when we are able to explain the circumstances why we should not put any capping or seal on the legislature and the judiciary, and we make the case forcefully, everybody is reasonable and we can accept it so that we work with it. So now back on the taxes. Obviously, I mean, nobody is happy with increasing taxes in our country. And remember, in 2017, this same government preached that we have to do away with nuisance taxes. And about 17 different taxes and levies were actually repealed and scrapped from our laws. So it's not like this government takes delight in introducing taxes in this country. But
while you've taken away some taxes, I mean, there was a point when we had a luxury tax, the people complained and you took it away. But it appears each time we take away, we find another end, a back end of adding new taxes, new levies, like the sanitation and, pollution levy that we've now added. 1% here, 1% there. It adds up to the burden of the ordinary Ghanaian, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So that is what we call, what we scrapped was what we call the nuisance taxes. There are certain taxes when you introduce, if you look at the earnings, the revenues you are receiving compared to the cost to the people, the burden you are giving them and the impact on businesses, you realize that you are actually going into negative. So that is what we call the nuisance taxes. But if you look at the current revenue frame, Honorable rightly put it there. If you look at the revenue expectation, we are talking about 72 billion, when last year we did 55 billion. The gap requires certain means by which government have to raise money to bridge that gap. And the options are there. Are we to borrow to fill that gap, or you can raise reasonable levels of taxes in order to fill the gap? When you borrow, you are only postponing the repayment from the people. At the end of the day, it is still going to add up to our repayment rate and our interest repayments, among several other consequences on our finances. So it will still come back to increasing the public debt. And we know, even at 297 billion, we are complaining that 76% on our GDP is already too high, and we have to do something about it. So the options are two. Either we'll continue to borrow to increase the percentage of GDP on our public debt to maybe 85%, or we introduce some of these taxes, and these are, I believe, well worked out levels of tax that will not, even though no tax will come without a burden, these are reasonable burdens that I think the Ghanaian populace will be willing to take up. So
okay. So as you address this point, let me just take you back. Your administration said we had the resources, that we didn't need to borrow so much, that we actually were sitting on the resources we could use to achieve some of these very things that you are talking to all of Ghana about. How come we now have to rely on borrowing or taxing the ordinary Ghanaian again? Is that not contrary to what we were told?
No, it is not contrary. And like what we said, borrowing or taxing is part of the resources that we have. We have never said anywhere that it is not good to borrow, but we have questioned the use of the borrowing whenever you take it. It must be used for productive causes so that you are able to repay. We have never said that don't tax the people. We never made that argument. But we said don't give nuisance taxes. Taxes that tend to have, taxes on condoms and cutlasses and taxes on there were certain level of taxes that were introduced in this country that you could call nuisance taxes. And like I said, the benefits and revenues that we generated from those taxes compared to the consequences and burden on businesses, it far outweighed it. But if you compare, even the midst of these few taxations that we have introduced, remember we have also introduced about 30% tax credit to a certain level of categories of workers, like the transport unions, the hotels, and several other people that we think they will need such support to do well in this COVID. Remember, every country in the world at the moment, as we speak, have to increase their public debt because of COVID. U.S. alone, they just approved $1.9 trillion to support the economy. And these are debts which has to be repaid in future. So in our country, there was a time when His Excellency needed to provide hot meals for the people. We needed to provide water for free, electricity for free in the difficult periods of the COVID when it was at its peak. All these things were done without having to burden the people. But as we are gradually coming out of the COVID situation, and of course, we are all looking forward to a positive outlook for this 2021 financial year, we think that it's about time we gradually recover some of these costs and debts that we have brought upon our public purse. And like I said, the only way to go about it is either you borrow to break the gap of the deficit you have, or you introduce certain minimal, reasonable levels of tax so that you are able to increase your revenues and meet the public obligations and commitments that we have as a government. And that's exactly what we are doing.
Honorable Kumar, I would have to...
To be fair, if you look at previous introduction of taxes, especially under the NDC, when they introduced ESLA and those difficult taxes, it was at a rate of 27%. And they make a good case that we should bite the bullet. So if we introduce 5% and 1% and 2%, look, we have all praised the government vision to have the cleanest city in Accra, as a vision. How do we achieve that? Looking at the
Honorable Kumar, let me come into the studio now.
That we have in this country.
Right. Let me come into the studio now and engage Honorable Champon, and you will have the last bite of this bullet, so to speak. He's mentioned, for example, ESLA, 27%. Interestingly, we keep increasing. VAT, for example, has gone up by another percentage point. I listened to Dr. Clement Apak in recent times saying that this is a very insensitive budget that has been put forward. Is that the thinking of the NDC, and how do you react to all these additions that have been brought to bear?
You see, politicians, we have to employ principle in whatever we do. Because all the taxes that he mentioned, when they were in opposition, they described them as nuisance taxes. But when they came to power, even with the energy sector levy, they keep increasing extra. Even with these new taxes, they are going to increase extra, but on 2 or 3 occasions. And then if you can mention about 17 taxes, you ask yourself, what is the incidence of those taxes? The effect on the ordinary Ghanaian in terms of how much each one is going to pay. Look at the financial sector cleanup tax of 5%. Already they are paying the fiscal stabilization levy of 5%. And they're going to add another 5% to make it 10% on their gross profit. This is not after tax, this is after profit, before profit. So you ask yourself, who is going to bear the burden? They will push on this cost to the customers. So you and I is going to pay. Cost of doing business is going to go up. Yes. Right now, they've increased 1% flat rate. Already, they introduced 3% flat rate, VAT flat rate. So it brings in the cascading effect. So it becomes tax on tax. Computation of it is very difficult. People can't do the input and output analysis. So by the end of the day, they sit at their own comfort zone and do the application. So it's going to trigger inflation. Right now, we are complaining the inflation is 10.4%. We are going to witness a hike in inflation. And they said either we borrow or we tax the people. So we are going to borrow. Because in the 2021 budget, we are projecting to pay an interest of 35 billion Ghana against 24 billion. So we are going to borrow and we are going to tax the people. So the people are going to pay tax, and the loans that we are going to contract, the same people are going to pay for it.
So in the end, just to wrap up, is the NDC, your side, are you going to reject this budget as long as these are maintained? Because some of your members have said that this is very insensitive.
Yes,
we shouldn't
the
go with this.
The sanitation tax and all that, we can introduce the polluter pay principle. Because
the what principle? Polluter pay.
Polluter pay principle. If you pollute the environment, you have to pay for it. Some communities, there's no landfill site. So why are you saying people are going to pollute the environment and somebody should go and pay for it? Open defecation. If it is in Accra or in Kumasi, and somebody is in my village and is not engaging in this, why do you expect somebody to pay for the sins of others?
Well, the conversation continues. Very interesting matters we've had to dig into.
We are going to resist many of the taxes. They are going to bring the tax bills. No, we have to be sensitive to the price of people because many people, their disposable income has already reduced. So we cannot overburden them.
Member of Parliament for Bia East, the Honourable Richard Echampo, saying we have to be sensitive to the plight of the people. Thank you very much, Honourable, for joining the conversation. Member of Parliament for Ejisu as well, and Vice Chairman, Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee of Parliament, Honourable John Kuma, joining the conversation as well. Earlier, we had Dr. Rashid Rahman, Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs. To all of you, Honourable Kuma, I know you're still on the line. Thank you so much, and the conversation does continue. But coming up next on the AM show, all these matters, some of them that we've been discussing, we hit the newsstands. My colleague Manuel Karanting did that to find out what people like you think about them. That is up next on the AM show. Do stay.